Day, we united day. Give us a round of applause. Yay. Everybody's here. We have some amazing leaders, and one in particular that I wanted to introduce. When we first were starting, it was the very first person. We're running all over the place trying to get people to listen to us, and we get a phone call at one of the industry events, and it's Dave Doherty, and he says, "Hi, Jackie. I was wondering, I would love to talk to you about this, women electronics that you're starting. Would you like to talk to me?" I was like, "Sure, Dave." And we sat down, and we had an amazing conversation. He's been one of our biggest supporters ever since. And so I want to welcome to the stage Mr. Dave Doherty. Oh, wow. We didn't get our grand music, but have a seat, Dave. Thank you so much for being here. We're just going to have it sit and have a little fireside chat. And before we do that, I wanted to play the DigiKey video. Thank you for sponsoring the session, Dave.
Thank you, Laura, and others.
Here we go. There we go. Good video.
Hey, thank you. Thanks.
All right. Congratulations. But first of all, Dave, I just want to say thank you so much for being here. It's always a pleasure to see you. I know it's a trip from Thief River Falls, and you have a lot of your team, so thanks for being here.
No, it's my pleasure. I've already got multiple pages of notes from the previous two speakers, and I'm sure I'll get a download from yesterday and look forward to taking a lot of those nuggets of wisdom back with me.
Okay. Well, let's just start and just get to know you a little bit, Dave, before we get into all of our discussion. So just tell us a little bit of your background. Like, how did you get into this industry, and what led you here at your position at DigiKey?
Tough question after Andre. It feels a little insignificant when we talk about exploding out, but because it's a little less exciting, I believe. Like Andre, I'm an engineer, electrical engineer, and in the mid-'80s came out of this industry not sure what I wanted to do, and it is kind of like that circulation, going around full circle. It's starting at a customer of companies like ours at Digital Equipment Corporation that no longer exists, but hopefully some of the folks remember that little entity. And then working for some manufacturers on the semiconductor side before finding my way into distribution with some faces from Arrow Electronics. It's great to see here. And then 18 years ago, wondering what it would be like to be at a place that was private, that had its mantra about serving engineers. I was never a very effective engineer, that's why I got into management. But could I help some of those folks that were changing the world? And I can remember bringing my son and my oldest son and my wife, of course, up to Thief River and said, not only my wife, but my son had full veto authority because we promised them with Arrow, we had moved from Boston to Long Island to Dallas to Denver. And it was so welcoming community. I can remember the first drop my son off at the school, and a young man picks him up, brings him over, introduces him to the football coach, the principal, and then of course wonderful interview up there. And so for some of the folks that have visited us, it gets a little cold in the winter. It's early December, and the hotel at the time had a pool in the front. And the moisture from the pool was causing the door. It was -8 was a high for the weekend, and it just kept freezing the ice casing. So they had a fan blowing on the door to try to melt the ice from the inside. So I thought there was no way I'm going to end up here. But on the flight back, I think both my wife and my son saw the energy and my excitement and said, "Hey, we support you. Let's go do this together as a family." And my younger son and daughter didn't have a vote, but they came along for the ride, thankfully.
That's so funny. But it also brings up the topic, too, that, these are the sacrifices you make when you become a leader. You got to move, and you got to be willing to relocate sometimes. But so here you are. So tell us a little bit about your position, though. Tell us what you're doing now. Tell us a little bit about DigiKey.
Sure. So, I'm currently CEO of DigiKey for the last 10 years. I joined the company for a couple of reasons. One was about culture, the reputation that this company had. I knew it from the outside as a customer, as a supplier, as a competitor, and really reveled in the things that they did. And the leader that preceded me for a short stint of 39 years, Mark Larson. And I got to know his style. And when you have the opportunity to choose what you want to do and who you can do it with who you can do it with, it's so liberating. And I knew Mark was, you kind of look at in life, I think of things in sports analogies. If I'm an assistant coach and I want to model myself after some sort of a head coach, Mark was the type of coach that his traits, I think more resembled where I aspired to be and how I inspired to lead. And then meeting the team, and you've gotten to know a bunch over the years, it was just a match made in heaven. The culture of the area, the upper Midwest. I'm from Boston, but my mom's side of the family is from the Midwest in Wisconsin, and it just felt so natural. And East Coast, West Coast, we pride ourselves on moving fast, and we think that's the way to go. And the Midwest, particularly upper Midwest, says, hey, you don't have to move so fast to get things done. And just a good time to do that.
So I remember, probably everybody does, the DigiKey, the thick catalogs. Remember the old days, and now we're all digital. But real quick before I get into one of my questions for you, what you said that Mark was a role model for you. Why? What was it?
Yeah, I think it's his understated style. Anybody that knows Mark, and probably many in this room do, he's physically of stature. Not the 6'5", former football player, and very calm. Seems on the outside. And I think people misunderstand how competitive he is internally. One of the most competitive people I've ever met, but he didn't feel like he had to wear it on his sleeve. And he always felt like he could achieve it by succeeding and servicing, working with others, delighting our suppliers, delighting our customers, delighting our team members, who's going to be his way of going about doing things. And it was always, and you talk about connection, and still so much for me to learn. I can remember coming in there, and I loved my experience at a big public company, but everything is about delivering results now, short term. You come in and you're thinking, I've got 30 days to make a difference, or I may be out. And Mark would always start the day with, hey, I listened to the radio last night. Your son sounded like he had a really good hockey game. Or, I saw this in the news. They had your daughter's picture in the paper. She achieved something at school. It was always a personal connection that always started his day with me. It wasn't, hey, where are the numbers? Where are we here? And it resonated with me. And it just reminds me, and some of the things we want to talk about is, if you want to influence, you want to work with, you want to collaborate with people, you got to get to know them first. And Mark did that so well. And it was, I've always found that I learn more from people that are opposite from me, because those weren't my natural. It's kind of that, what Michael talked about this morning, direct. Get in there and say, okay, where are we today? What is the task at hand? Instead of starting with a little bit slowness, a little bit slower, to make sure you understand the people you're working with.
Yeah, and you know what I love about Thief River Falls? It is the cutest, sweetest town. Like, those who haven't, I'm sure most people have been there, but it's one of the only airports you can fly into, and you literally land, and they're like waiting for you with your keys, like, or the keys in the DigiKey van. Like, you just walk out. It's just so easy. Everything is that they're so hospitable, and every time I go to DigiKey, it's just that sweet little town. I love it. And they have the DigiKey bucks that you could use all around town too, which is kind of fun. You might want to just say that real quick.
We're just excited to get visitors. We don't get a lot of people up there. We're not a destination. But, what Jackie's alluding to is Digibucks. We decided early on, it was such a key part of the community. An interesting stat is, the last one I heard was 48% of the labor force in the county works at DigiKey. So that is truly symbiotic. We wouldn't be where we are without the community, and we have a responsibility in turn. So for different times of the year, spring, Christmas, et cetera, we give out Digibucks, a little bit like chamber bucks that have to be spent in the community. So it's rewarding, thanking your team members, but letting that have that extra multiplying effect back in the community itself. It's fun to see even big institutions like Walmart on there. We proudly accept Digibucks. It's one of the neat nuances.
It's super cool. But I wanted to show just a couple pictures, just to bring a little flavor to DigiKey and some of the people, and then we'll get on to some questions. But Dave, I was just going to show a few of these pictures because I'm super impressed with the state-of-the-art facility you all just built. So I don't know if you want to touch on that one real quick.
Really quick, because I know we've got some competitors and partners in here, and believe me, their facilities are pretty amazing. Mark understood early on that he didn't want, people, I think, they make assumptions, and you're going to come up to DigiKey near the Canadian border, and it's going to be a nice, kind-hearted folks, but they're going to be a little behind the times. And everything we wanted to show was quite the opposite, that the fact that we are remote meant that you had to work a little harder to get from point A to point B. And so, in the ability to be private, to have an owner that doesn't meddle, or he's the best owner you could imagine, that says, hey, I'm not looking to build an island. He hasn't changed his lifestyle, never been married, no children. So he says, hey, grow a company and create a company and continue to have a company that I can be proud of. And in automation, our customers don't want to pay for waste. So do it right the first time. Do it right so that we can take waste out of the system, so our employees, what I don't know that shows in here is how clean the facilities are, what the break rooms look like. We want the team members proud, particularly the 9 months of winter we have when they come in the building, they get warm, that it's a place that they're happy to be in and be a part of.
Thank you, Dave. All right, and so we'll move on, and I'm just going to put this up for now, and then we'll get to some conversation. We'll come back. So he's like, oh, great, I get to look at my So since we'll just start with this, since we're here for we, so might as well start with this. What is, you called me that day, Dave, which I have to say is rare because, right, we usually don't have people just looking to come find us in the industry at large, especially back when we were starting. You did that. You actually made that attempt and you reached out. Why did you do that? And then why has this relationship continued at DigiKey?
Yeah, we talk about that often, and for me, that's a really easy answer. It's, I'd like to say, oh, it's altruistic. I believe in leveling the playing field and equality, and while I do believe all of those things, whenever you come into a new environment, the first thing you do is assess that environment. What are my strengths? What are my liabilities? What resources do I have in abundance? Which do I have in scarcity? And Mark said the same thing when he handed the reins over. He said, I don't worry about the external world. I don't worry about growth. I worry about us. And I mentioned a little bit about the labor pool. You can imagine that it's fairly finite, particularly in leadership. And when you looked around, you said, well, what are those commodities, or what are those resources that are untapped? It was clearly, for me, it was women in leadership. We, unfortunately, and to this day, I'm still not proud of the numbers, we have a higher percent of women within the company. We're about 5,000 employees, and almost 4,000 are in Thief River Falls, to give you some perspective. So we have a large base of very hardworking women employees. We have a higher percentage at the supervisor level and at the manager. And again, like so many other companies, it falls off as you get into senior manager, senior directors, VP, CEO, et cetera. And that's the untapped resource for us. So I came to Jackie not, hey, what can I do? I want people to realize DigiKey cares about these things. While we do, absolutely, we needed you. We needed to find a way to not have our women leaders plateau prematurely beyond their capabilities. And so it was self-serving. And I've told you from that day one, I came to you because I needed something from you, from we. You have a bunch of men leaders and you ask men leaders, how are you going to develop women leaders? It's a little bit of a challenge. And so over the years, the resources that we has afforded us, I can remember you had your first national meeting like this, and not dissimilar, probably smaller in size, I think it was around 80 people. We said, we need a chapter meeting. And I want it to be not only DigiKey, but let's open it up to women leaders in the community. In that very first meeting, we capped it at 225. And that's when the light bulb went off that said, hey, there's something to this. And again, the folks from DigiKey that have been here, that have participated as members, they've helped bring that back. To listen to the speakers, to help educate the women, to feel comfortable with some of the topics around, hey, I can remember these statistics. If a man applies for a position, if they meet 3 or 4 of those 10 characteristics, they're in. They're going to apply. And oftentimes for that woman, it's I got to be at a minimum 9. And things like that, they sink in, and you say, you know what, this stuff is real. It's not imaginary. So how do we confront that? And we have a mutual goal to grow the company and grow the leaders. And the speakers that have come up over the years have been phenomenal, and our commitment to continue to do that. So, it's not thank me, it's thank you and thank the organization.
Okay. Thank you, Dave. That's very nice, and it's been an amazing relationship. So let me ask you this. We're going to get into a lot of leadership stuff, and this is you speaking somewhere on AI. I asked your team to send me some pictures, but what we're going to get into a little bit of your why for leadership, Dave, and then talking more about utilizing that influence of a leader, because I think it's one thing we don't talk about all the time is how are you going to behave once you're there? That sometimes changes, and you see people rise up and you see the difference sometimes in people and knowing who you are before you get there. So what's your why, Dave, for being a leader?
Yeah, it's a good question. One of those thought provoking. A couple of things come to mind. For one is, to me, is frankly a service. Is the role of a leader is to serve. And maybe early on in my life, I'm the oldest sibling of four. My mom was 17. She left school without her high school diploma to get married. I came around a year later, and she found herself at 24, divorced, no high school education. I had three younger siblings, and so right away you kind of get thrown into that position of how can you help? How can you take that role? And so it always felt natural to say, hey, how can I help coordinate, facilitate, get a group together, figure out what are our goals, where do we want to head, and then some of the things that Michael talked about. It's an interesting to have the ability to achieve things collectively with folks and play a role in trying to orchestrate that and do it in such a way that the team can achieve its goals and its members its goals individually. And so again, we're starting with my family and then with a smaller entity. And frankly, I never would have imagined that it would be a larger entity like DigiKey. When I came there, I asked Mark, I said, hey, like that head coach analogy, I'm not asking you to guarantee or promise me anything except that you'll help me grow. You'll help me teach and learn to continue to grow. Leadership's like any other skill. It can be acquired, it can be honed, and it can be developed. And so I looked at it that way and just marveled in it. I marvel at successful leaders, and I marveled at leaders that failed in trying to diagnose it. Much like Andre was fascinated by the universe, I've always been fascinated with leadership and how to try to be effective and continue to up your game little by little.
I love that about you, Dave. I do. So what are some, so as a leader, it's not so easy.
Yeah.
And so when you're making your hard decisions as a leader, how do you stick by your convictions, make those tough decisions, but you're caring about the people and in the organization? But what is it that you do to go through those decision-making processes to make those tough decisions?
Yeah, Jackie, I think that question's preceded by how you get to those decisions. And I think the key is, and folks at different levels of, and we should distinguish between leadership and management. Management's having people work for you, and we'll get into it a little bit more because everyone's a leader, has the opportunity to be a leader. But when you manage people, you think you have to be the smartest person in the room. The CEO, they talk about it being a lonely position because you're certainly the last person of accountability. But you're not the most knowledgeable person or the subject matter expert, I'd say in many things and perhaps any one thing that happens within the company. So you have to listen, you have to align, you have to have that discussion of, what are the individual's goals and try to collectively, can we come up with and can we align on our North Star, no pun intended, on where we want to head as an organization and where do we want to be long-term, short-term. Again, being private, I'm not worried about what am I going to tell the investors 90 days from now. I worry about where's this company going to be when I step back, when the next leaders come in, when our owner decides that it's time for him to move on, and all those types of things. And with the help of everyone, once you align on the vision, things become easier. Much like the career discussion, you're having a career discussion for the company. And so you pool those ideas and hopefully, good leaders revel with the notion that, hey, I had this coming in, but my ideas were shaped and influenced by others and might be totally different going out of that. Maybe not the end goal, but the path that you're going to achieve to get there. So we align, on the destination. We're going to drive to Boston, but we try to figure out which path are we going to take to get there.
So, okay, taking the path to get there, who are your mentors, Dave? Because we've been talking about mentors here. We have a mentorship program. It's kind of come up a lot. So who are your mentors, why, and then what are you doing at DigiKey to implement that?
Yeah, and, honestly, I'd tell you not enough. But to answer the first part of it, each of you, and one of the takeaways I had from a prior conference that you had led with we is, who are your individual board of directors? Who are the people that you look to? You should have them at any point in your career. And, and I've been blessed. Some have offered that up, some I've reached out to. I've reached out to competitors. When I first joined ECIA, Lee Davidson was leading Allied. And I said, Lee, do you mind? I have a couple of suppliers in Texas. Can I come down and see you? And he said, absolutely. He was so generous with his time. Mike Morton is another person that, that I lean on. He was with a private company that went through a transition. So many things you go through, trying to go through COVID. So throughout my career, I've had different people, and many of those I try to retain and hold on to. Every company that I've been at, I could name one or two people that we still stay in touch with. Now, the reciprocal of that is, I think so often as leaders, we are humble. We think more about our needs to find mentors for ourselves, and sometimes we forget about how others see us and our need to mentor others. We're either too humble or acknowledge that, geez, I don't know what I have to share, but you do. And that's one of the big messages to our managers and leaders, those directors, managers. You matter. Frankly, you matter more than I do because they interface with you. So there's formal programs. I've been part of that. And then there's been informal. And to date, I'd say we're more informal, but one of the most amazing leaders in our company, well, and Linda Johnston, and she's looking to put more structure and to have that a more sustainable part of our organization.
So, okay, so let me ask you, as people are rising up in the organization, where we were talking prior about leadership influence, and what do you feel about that, though? What do you feel about people in a power position utilizing their influence? How do you navigate this in an organization? Like we're talking about here, Michael, of people being entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah.
So, but how do you bottle that up and make sure that people are actually using their influence in the way and the direction that you're intending for the organization?
Yeah, influence is one of those words that's got a couple different sides of that coin, connotations. Sometimes when you first hear it, you think about persuading someone, and, try to convince them to your point of view. I would say influence, maybe the first question you ask yourself is, who influences you? And that gives you a good idea. And I think if I asked any of you that question, you'd name some people, and I'd say why. It would probably start with, I have an immense amount of trust for that individual. And so if you're looking to influence people, I would say you put that in the reverse order, and you say, if I haven't built the trust, and you build that through familiarity, then there's no hope to influence them. And then again, influence them to what? You'd like to think it's a common goal. I've always found that there's disagreements of opinion, but if you thought about that along a spectrum, it's typically not at the end goal. It's not even a couple of stages. It's some of the earlier stages. So back to my analogy, it's disagreeing. Are we going to take a left turn? Are we going to go north from Minneapolis to get to Boston? Are we going to take the southern route? Not that we haven't aligned on where the goal is. So I prefer to start with what we have in common, what we agree with, what we're aligned on. And now you can have an open discussion. And that's critical. And there's far too little of that today. And we don't need to digress into politics, but people don't seem to want to be influenced. They don't want to come into a discussion with an open mind that says, I have some of these thoughts and ideas and beliefs, but I know they're not all totally mine. You have different ones. And again, as I mentioned earlier, if I can walk out of a meeting learning something that I get a different perspective from, I see it of value, as opposed to, hey, I come in here and I believe these 5 things, and my goal is to convince this audience that I'm right and that they adopt these same 5 things. So back to it. So influence, you have the ability, and again, it's not a title thing. Believe me, there's a lot more folks I think that are effective at influencing the organization. And so when we're going through a major change, we look at cascading messages from the top, but we also look at those key drivers inside of the organizations, those quiet leaders. They may not have a team reporting to them, but you can be darn sure when in the break room, they're the person that they're listening to. Have I listened to them? Do they buy into this vision? Do they even understand this vision of where we're going? Michael talked earlier about the number one thing that most of our organizations are dominated more with rank and file than directors and VPs. So if they dominate the number of folks and their number one care about is stability, well, how do I make sure that I've addressed that and they understand that where we're going is not to threaten that stability? It's complicated, and that's part of this journey.
It is. Okay, so I'm just going to pull in some things that we talked about yesterday.
Yeah.
So we were having a little open discussion, and it did come up about, we're passionate women leaders, just like our male colleagues are passionate, right, about their jobs. And sometimes, we might need to step out of the room and shed a tear. We might be upset, might cry. Is that a big deal?
Yeah, I'd say, obviously, the answer is no, it's not a big deal. I think, again, what precedes that is, and I learned this, my takeaway from notes from Michael, he talked about the story of someone with autism, and I'm not, go with me a little bit on this comparison, that we're all different, and we have different ways of expressing ourselves. And I think, as we spoke about that, it happens. To me, it's very comfortable. What I've learned is, and believe me, this isn't a gender thing. My wife will kid at times, and I'll come home from work, she'll say, "Who'd you make cry today?" So, but some of it's out of happiness, out of joy, accomplishing a major goal. Some is concern. Some is some things that have happened at home that are coming into the workforce, and you just quietly try to sit back and listen, which I do. I need to do a much better job at. I took that acronym down there of how to approach that, and just quietly bring the tissue box. And sometimes, to a fault, I feel the need to fill a space instead of just being quiet and listen and let the person, and ask them, would you like to take some time? Would you like a moment? But again, what I really took away from the discussion this morning is, even before that, making sure from the team that you understand, how do you express yourself? How do you show your emotions so that it's not a surprise when it happens? With the discussion on autism, do you mind if I touch you or I hug you? And just getting to know each other in that way.
And we've talked about, I remember the summit you came to, and you've referred to it several times when we've talked, as the superpowers of men and women that we talked about. And because we do have different superpowers, and they're good. They're good that they're different, right? So typically, men have certain superpowers and women have others. And it's beautiful that when they come together, it's just the magic spot, right? So, maybe you can talk to that, Dave, and just how have you seen that show up in your organization?
Yeah, certainly. For folks that don't know what we're talking about, particularly, well, anyone in here, please, I don't know if you've recorded it, but go back, because clearly any of us that have had kids know that two boys are different from each other, two girls, but there are certainly some things, and was it Shauna that I think led that one?
Dr. Sean, yes.
Dr. Sean?
Here somewhere.
It was really eye-opening to me, because I could relate to a lot of the things, and the beauty of it was, it wasn't good or bad, there were just some differences, and her, I think the message was, how do you blend those two? So, I'll bring one into action. We build a new warehouse. We spend a lot of money, a lot of technology, and not everything is going perfectly. And we've got really smart people, but getting them to play in the room was challenging. Getting the folks in the PDC, with the folks from the operational excellence, from the software guys that we always like to throw under the bus. And so we had the lack of cohesiveness. So I asked Linda Johnson, who was heading up our global customer service and our executive vice president of operations, but nothing to do with the warehouse. I said, you've been doing this for a number of years. Will you take this role, having the warehouse, operational excellence, the quality team reporting into you? And she said, what are you, crazy? I'm not going to bring any subject matter expertise to that. I said, you're not. The subject matter experts are in the room, but what you bring is a sense of calmness. You approach it. And the things that stand out to me is male leaders like to be risk-taking, like to make quick decisions, and there's a more thoughtfulness, a more, as I mentioned earlier, understanding the players in the room. And Linda's got a bunch of little signs and sayings, and one of them says, are the right people in the room for that discussion? And so she's been doing that for a couple of years now, and it's worked wonders. She didn't say, hey, you know what, we've got to realign this pick-pack station, and we've got to do this. But the team worked at a different level. And I had some folks that were skeptical. The gentleman that led the warehouse said, hey, no disrespect, Dave, I love you and I love Linda, but what is she going to bring to the party? And I said, just you hold that question and let's talk down the road. And the team loves her, and we're now looking to put her into another area, help run our transformation office. And I think we're going to pull her away. They're going to be fighting every step of the way. And but we'll figure that out.
Well, there's two things there. One is that Linda stepped into a big challenge. And so we talked about this as women too, is stepping into those opportunities. Even if you don't know, Mino had addressed this yesterday as well, is just step into that space where you're willing to learn and grow and you can learn it, right? So Linda did that. And then she also was given the opportunity.
Yeah. And
So
yeah, the other thing for the women in this room is, different environments. I can't speak to all of yours, but I can tell you in general, speaking for myself, men tend to come across like we know what's going on, we're self-assured, but some of that's just a little bit of a facade. And we do want to improve, we do want to, and I think back to a specific off-site meeting, and Terry Ivanishin and Linda were both in that, and Yvonne, whose name I passed on to you recently, was facilitating that. And she said, hey, we have a little bit of downtime. Let's talk about some other topics. How are we doing around gender equality and unconscious bias? And I was like, we got that nailed. Let's go on to something else. And Linda and Terry both said, excuse me. And it took me aback. And I said, well, what are you talking about? Please, say some more. And she said, well, last weekend you talked about what you were doing Saturday, and you reached out to Shane and Chris and Mike and said, hey, are we going to golf this weekend? A supplier said, hey, I've got tickets to the Vikings game. Do you want to bring some people? And who did you ask? 3 other men. You never even thought of us. And and through probably one of the things I try to be most sensitive about, because you just don't lose that instantaneously, is that unconscious bias. The things that you don't see. The word unconscious implies I'm not trying to be chauvinistic. I'm not trying to exhibit these traits, but I don't see them. I credit Linda and Terry for calling that out. And now I go back to them regularly. We have a meeting, and they'll say, time out, Linda, how did I do here? And we've got this comfort level where she's not afraid to tell me, hey, you know what, here's another example where you've got to pull back. When she exposes her leaders, both men and women, to present proposals to me, she says, Dave, stop and listen to the proposal. You're on page 1, right away you're flipping through and you say, can we go to page 17 and talk about that? She says, don't do that. So Linda and others like that are a gift to me, because we all have those blind spots. Again, by definition, that's what it means. You're blind to it. And if you don't have people that there's enough trust where they know they can call that out, it's not only a disservice to you and the organization, but to that leader. So do your best to be the Lindas inside of your organization, not afraid of calling that out. And I'm willing to bet the vast majority of time that'll work out with a great ending. If not, there's plenty. I see some of my counterparts in this room that feel similar to me. Come call us when we have openings, and we'd love to have you part of our team.
That was part of yesterday, Carla. You talked about that, right? That was part of the let me, is being honest. And thank goodness that Linda is able to do that. And you see how it affects and helps so many other people when we have that honesty. I think that's awesome. But the other thing too, and we're not gonna spend a whole session on this, but I do think it's noteworthy to say women at large are very empathetic people at large, right? And tend to exude that very naturally. And so that's part of what we're here for too, is to talk about the heart of leadership and to make some strides moving forward. So is there ever a time, Dave, that you feel that is a detriment?
I think detriments come when two people see things differently. And, as we've said, sometimes we're thinking from different sides of the brain. We can, another thing that Sean gave the example, Dr. Sean, that day, she talked about, when given a scenario during an interview or something of the like, it's usually oftentimes because of the way the hierarchy cascades, it's a male conducting that discussion saying, hey, how would you handle this situation? And she gave the example where very frequently the male would say, hey, I would do this, this, and this in this time frame, and they would come back with a sense of immediacy, which reinforces what men are looking for. And they may ask a woman the same, and she'd be more reflective, and maybe that would come across as unsure of herself or not confident, when instead it was, hey, I don't like to try to tell you what the puzzle looks like with only 10% of the pieces. Give me some time. And in organizations, what you find is there's times when you want that quick decision making, and there's time where you do need to gather some additional information. So again, her message was not either side is right or wrong, but think of the power if you can bring both of those together. And that does come full circle to why we do need more gender equality, and why we do, diversity does strengthen teams and lead to better outcome and better performance.
And I'm just going to flip back real quick just because we're talking about this right now. Hold on a second. Hello. And we'll get there. But this is the team, right? Is this your?
Yeah, this is, and again, even at that, I'm not proud of the fact that Linda's the only face in that. I would say where some of the gains we make, if you go to that next level down inside of the directors, when and the team here knows it well, the Missy Halls, the Lisa Pittmans, the Tiffanys, the list goes on and on. So we are building a bench, because it's not how fast you get to a position, men or women aside, but making sure that you're ready when you get into that position. And I love the discussion about start that development, not after you give someone the role, but in advance of that. How liberating is it for the individual to know, hey, they see me on this career path, and let me try it out. And you'll find that some of those star salespeople may decide, you know what, I don't want to be a sales manager, and you avoid that catastrophe. But yeah, this is the team, and you talk about some of the diversity. One of the guys on the left that's been a part of Shane, or my left anyway, Shane Zutz was a high school, my kid's high school principal teacher, and he was my son's varsity baseball coach. But we had discussions a couple times a year. We talk about leadership, and he exuded it, and he was thrilled with that. And I said, really, you're involved with teaching children from elementary up to high school. How'd you like to come to an environment where you take them now the rest of their career and lives? And again, brought no direct subject matter expertise. And the team said, what's he going to bring us? He doesn't know anything about benefits, about comp programs, about policy. And I said, well, do you? Yeah, I don't need someone to tell me that. I said, exactly. Let's get somebody in here that can help figure out then how we drive growth for you and others in this organization different from how do I solve your problems. He's not going to come in and do that.
Yeah. Great team. And what you were talking about, layers, I was just there a couple months ago, right, at DigiKey. We had a really great panel. You have some amazing female leaders, and I would have to say, we always say it's about progress, not perfection. So you start where you are at, and you can see when you have the heart there, things happen. You have to give the patience and the grace for improvement and for results, right? And so I noticed a huge, just a real change at DigiKey and real progress in the sense of I see so many female leaders rising up at DigiKey.
Now it's easy in some respects. Companies are in different phases. We've been in a continual growth, so it's this inverted pyramid. So for us, we have to build the bench. We have those roles ready. I understand some of you may be in more mature organizations so I don't want to make this sound like this is a piece of cake. I don't know why the rest of you haven't done this, but there is still some commonality in all of this, because there is this big wave of people closer to my age and yours that are exiting the workforce. And so I would tell you, regardless of how rigid or structured or lack of opportunity you may perceive there today, that is the biggest fear with me and all executives is, I think the recession in 2009, 2010, and then COVID and we skipped a generation. And so that natural progression isn't there. So we got to play catch up when it comes to leadership.
So, I haven't asked you about this, Dave, but what are some of those suggestions? How do we catch up with that?
I think put that discussion in the room. Most companies and most leaders, and I admitted it myself, we think short term. We think about, there's a little bit of an adrenaline rush with putting out a fire. Let's face it, that feels good. I can see, and especially upper Midwest, we don't mind working, getting our hands dirty, but sometimes that's not necessarily the most productive things. Thinking a little bit, we talk about the team. It's great that everyone will pick up a shovel and start digging the trench from here to the ocean. But is that the smart thing to do? Should we instead go rent a backhoe and get that job done in an hour? The cerebral thinking sometimes doesn't occur. So get that discussion in the room. Where are we as an entity? Are we concerned with what happens next? What's the legacy of our company? And where do we want it to be, and what are the risks? And I'd be willing to bet in any one of your organizations, it's going to be that continuity of leadership in some way, shape, or form. So how are we, and the fact that you're here today tells me that you care about that. That this isn't self-serving. There is an aspect of that, but I bet if I talked with any of you, it would be more than that. It would be more, my company, your companies need you. They need you to take these messages away and make sure that they do get heard.
So Dave, if we're looking at leadership legacy, and you just mentioned, succession, what's the legacy you want to leave? What does this leadership role mean to you? what is that, and what do you want to impart beyond yourself?
Yeah, I was on the plane last night, and I'm typing in, through Copilot, does legacy have an implication of vainness? And you should ask yourself that. And clearly, I kid with folks and said, I have no illusions that anyone's going to build a statue out in front of the company. It's not about that, but it is about, wouldn't it be nice that you can look back at some point in time, or not, you may be gone, but know that there was some lasting change for the good that happened, that we can, in our case, that we continue to serve customers. All of us in this room, in this industry, we're not the end customer. Our customers do amazing things. They're saving lives. They're going to save the planet at some point once we decide to stop ruining it. And we're helping support that in the supply chain endeavors that we do. That there's a sense of pride. And so what's the legacy? Have you built a sustainable organization? Are our team members? I really get, it's really up in Thief River, we know that the community has health care. A lot of people's children are going off for further education because of the jobs and the careers that they have. So is that sustainable? Leaders, and it's one of the points we talked about was legacy is not determined in the short term. And there's examples of both. Growing up in my formative years, when you think of leaders, with folks like Lee Iacocca and Jack Welch, and these guys, hey, they made things happen. These guys are icons. Look back now on how history reflects and looks at those individuals. And then conversely, look at others. Ken Olson, my first company at Digital Equipment Corporation. They said Ken missed the boat on personal computers. He believed in mini computers with these terminals that accessed the data. And I question now that he's long since passed with cloud computing and such. Was he a visionary or was he a dinosaur? So don't expect that your legacy, you're going to retire and they're going to put up a big testament to the successes of Jackie or Dave. But does that impact, does it outlive you? And it's a fun, when you think of it that way, it's aspirational for not just you personally, but I challenge the leadership team. We're given an opportunity in our case of an owner that, I've described him earlier, and we have a runway where, he's empowered us to shape this company the way we choose to. We have the ability with very little constraints to decide what is DigiKey going to look like 2 years from now, 10 years from now, or 25 years from now. And that's what I hope each of you should be thinking in not a vain way. But how would you like, and even if it's not you personally, your efforts to be remembered, or what impact you want your efforts to have, more than you physically?
That's a good point, Dave. I really like that. And last, I want to ask you about innovation, because you mentioned our customers are innovating, right? And we're supposed to be innovating with them. And I think you probably laughed at me because I sent you a whole list of the stages of innovation and what are we looking at, things like, and you just summed it up so simply, and I was like, oh, okay, this is a difference of how our brains work. But what do you think about innovation and what we're doing here in this industry?
Yeah, innovation, no matter how you describe it, if you're not innovating, you're not moving forward. You're not moving forward, by definition, you're moving backwards. So we have to do it. I like to talk to folks, again, bring some of the simple analogies. Change is a natural part of life. Watch your children. Watch them go from crawling to cruising, to walking, to running. Watch what you've done in your career. Watch what's happened. At DigiKey, I joke with some of the folks here who have been at DigiKey for a long time, and they say, oh, there's so much change going on. I said, well, talk to me about DigiKey 20 years ago. Oh, there was so much change going on. It's the mind has a way of making the past seem like it was very stable, and the present seem like it's very uncertain. So as long as you can keep some North Stars. I have a habit of pulling back some slides and that people clap and applaud to in the presentation, probably because they feel they have to. And I say, you know what? If I timestamp that, that's a slide I showed 8 years ago. And so the sad part of it is there's consistency. That's a good part. The sad part is we haven't made as much progress as we want to. And so how do you get people comfortable? Well, again, it goes back to the trust, which builds alignment to a goal, that builds the ability for them to influence you and you to influence them to come to these mutual visions, and then recognize the milestones along the way. The other thing Linda and others have taught me is, I've always kind of personally believed that, hey, I'll take a nanosecond to accelerate success, but I don't want anybody to get complacent. Let's get that next goal out there. And I've got folks on the team that are wonderful at saying, hey, Dave, we're not going to get complacent. We're not going to feel entitled, but we need to stop, rest, acknowledge the success we've just had. People need that. And we each need different things. We each have different buttons that drive us, and you'll never know all of them. And so again, the more through the diversity in your team, you'll figure out more what your team needs.
So we have a panel coming up later that I'm very excited about, and it's our digital transformation panel. But I wanted to ask you, so they're going to address a lot of things in their panel, but do you feel that we are there, Dave, with our innovation in the electronics industry as far as keeping up an innovation and everything that is involved with that?
Yeah, nowhere near. And one of my favorite speakers to listen to is sitting over there at the end is Michael Knight. And Michael has done a much better job of staying up with technology. I would say we're about to enter a period with AI, the likes of which we've never seen in our life. When we have guest speakers that come to DigiKey to try to get people prepared for it, they talk about this is like when electricity came in. People didn't know exactly how it was going to be used, how transformative. So I would say everything we've done to date is preparing for you for this next round of monumental change. And I've had even some people here already give me some websites or some places where we have a ton of AI programs going on, but it is difficult to keep up with that level of innovation of what it's capable of doing. And the idea of knowledge is power. When I first came into the distribution side of the industry, we thought we were going to get disintermediated. And then when the web came out, and we learned that it was just a shifting, and those that adopt to shifts do well. Well, AI is going to be another monumental shift, and so understand it's a tool in the toolbox. It's not going to use you, you're going to use it. But you better embrace this one, because this one, we're still in the early stages, and remember, there's typically more hype early on, but this is going to be transformative. This is going to be way more than us telling our kids, I remember when I had a Luggable, my laptop computer, or before the iPhone, et cetera. So figure that out. That we talked about hidden figures, and I gave the example to my team yesterday, a different one that we talked about, is to remember when the IBM, for anyone who's seen that, if you haven't, watch it this weekend, the IBM mainframe was going to come in and transform what these amazing women were doing by hand. And instead of being, and I'm sure there was some uncertainty, concern, but it wasn't the individuals, the supervisor took it upon themselves to go and understand Fortran and programming and transform their team. So if you're leaders, it's incumbent upon you to figure out what AI is going to be similar to that IBM mainframe and help your team go through that adjustment and figure out how to leverage it. Don't be waiting for the wave to hit you. Be in front of it.
Really good point. It should be at leadership table, top of conversation, right? So we're getting to time here pretty quickly, Dave, but I wanted to ask you because, leadership is so important. And so as just a human, right? You're a human being and you're a leader. So if you could, just give some insights into you, Dave, and what are some of those things in life, the things that make you maybe the most happiest and joyful in your soul, and the things that actually would make you want to cry in your soul? What are those things for you?
We didn't script that one, Jackie, so I want you to kind of catch you on the fly. I'd say sincerely, my mom, I gave you a little bit of the backdrop story, played a big role in my life. We were partners in our family, and she connected with people. That was her superpower. I remember. It was Amy. When I lived in Denver, she was coming to visit us to come see her grandkids, not to see me. And she gets off the plane and she brings this guy over to me. She goes, Dave, I just met the amazing guy, and can you believe he lives right here in Denver? I was like, Mom, the plane came to Denver. I bet most of this plane. But the gentleman offered her a job. Would you like to come work for my company? And she was just that type of person. And so I think for me, is helping people, get to, any leader should get tremendous joy, helping folks reach their potential, get to their goals. I took some great notes because we're guilty of the performance review, and I love that, the career, where do you want to head? And if you can't get some joy out of that, I don't know what you can. I'd say on the heartstrings is many of us have a chance to travel globally, and I've been engaged in a project 2 weeks ago. A school that we've been working on for 3 years just opened in Malawi, a country I'd never heard of until I got engaged with this in Africa, because there's 17,000 kids that don't have access to a secondary education. So it's it's like a small college in the sense that the kids can't travel, so they live on site. The teachers live on site. And what really hit me was we've got budgets, and I said, hey, we're, of course, coming from corporate, I want a strict governance on what the money's being spent on, so send me a list this week. And the list on the second week of school, as the students start arriving, they came over a 3-week span because some are walking, riding bikes, however they could get there. They said, we need a little bit more money. I said, for what? Well, for toilet paper and for some sanitary things for our women. There's 150, half women, half men. And they said, you don't understand. For most of these kids, it'll be the first time they've slept in a bed or used a toilet. And when you talk about, so I'll be out there. We're going to have the grand opening. We wanted to, hopefully shake out some of the bugs October 25th. So I'll be back out there. And some of the folks in this room have been tremendous in donating to that cause as well. And you've got to also find those things outside of work because they ground you.
I love humanitarian leaders because that's the goal. And Dave, I love that you're doing that school. And I think, we got to put our heads together how we just come in full support behind that effort too. I've seen that a lot, and I love that. I've actually traveled to Africa to go visit some orphanages. And so what you're describing, I fully understand so much need.
And I applaud, and I learned that from others. Believe me, I look back and there's so much more you'd like to have done, with your life to help others. And, each of you, I'm sure in your own way are involved in it. So it's not that one project's any more important than the other, but there's so much. We are so blessed. The one thing that I took away, and, I stayed at the Archbishop's trying to be very careful to kill every mosquito I could see in this dormitory with cold water. And I said, when do you get to the point? Because these people are just so happy with having so little. And I said, when do you transition from being so appreciative to what you have, do you come back home to being so dissatisfied because you want more? I don't know where that bridge gets crossed, but it's not until you see some of that you start to think a little bit differently about yourself, your family, your job, your company, your career.
I agree with you, Dave. So I'll just take 1 minute and see. Does anybody have any questions of Dave before we start wrapping it up here? While we have him here, does anybody have any questions? Sarah.
Dave, Sarah Rich with Supply Frame.
Yeah.
So we've been a long-time partner. You guys have done tremendous work over the last couple of decades on growing your company. One thing I personally noticed is you keep the culture at heart.
Sure.
Like, all the people that I work with on your team embody that. So if you think about all the things you've been talking about with change coming and everything getting faster and new leadership coming in, what do you think is the most important to keep that culture at heart, and more importantly, how do you notice when it's getting off track?
Ooh, that's a good question. How do you notice when the culture is getting off track? That was really good.
It's huge. And, every company aspires to grow, but boy, the challenges that come with growth. We try to do a lot of, we do believe, that's what brought me there. It's just, the community didn't care who I was or who my title was, but am I a good person? Is there integrity? And I tell some of the folks that I'm jealous, I'm envious when they were there when there was 50 people or 100 or 200. They all knew each other, knew each other's families. They had one Christmas party, everybody attended. And so you try to consciously, though, remind folks. We talk about that all the time. We want to continue to feel small as we get larger. So every incoming group that's coming into the warehouse or customer service, those are the two largest areas where people come in. Myself, Shane, the business functional leaders, we meet with those folks. We talk to them. We get to know them. We've got a company culture up there that when we get a blizzard, everybody has a second skill. Mine is picking, because packing's too complicated, and God forbid I go into the receiving area. And people seeing you in there's just a connection where it just feels so natural. That was the culture before I got there. And then I meet with the folks. Everyone that retires, it's been there 20 years or longer, I try to have some face-to-face time and say, what brought you here? Why did you continue to make this commute? What would you tell me, because people can be very honest when they're leaving, their last day. What's one thing that you would never change, and what's the first thing that you would change? And you get those inputs, and you just listen. And exactly as stated earlier, you don't have to respond, just listen. But it's not without its challenge. We left the Thief River boundaries. We opened an office in Bloomington, and then in Shanghai, and then in Munich, and Enschede, and trying to travel. I'd say it's hard to do over Teams meetings. That supplements a relationship. It's hard to create a relationship. So be intentional. Be in front and center. Get in front of folks. Answer the hard questions. If you have nothing to hide, don't hide it. If people are confused, oftentimes with the lack of information, they'll put in their own ideas of why you're doing it. I get a kick out. Every once in a while with social media, they talk about management like them. I'm like, are you kidding me? We live in Thief River. Our kids go to school together. It's us. It's not them. If you've got questions, come talk to me. But that's easy to say, but make sure you're out there. I've got my calendar, my leadership team looks at it and says, how come you have so much open space on your calendar? I said, it's because you have so little open space. It's like you guys are doing so much of that work. It gives me that flexibility. It doesn't mean I'm not busy or not productive, but it's doing things we're allowed time to be spontaneous, for somebody to come up to you, to see the mom whose daughter your son took to the prom 10 years ago, whose work as a custodial, and ask her how her day is going and what's happening. And it's those people that really have the vibe of what's going on in the company, not the executive VP that works for you.
That was a really good question. Any other questions?
Where's the softball ones? Come on.
Oh, is that you, Janine? Are you raising?
Yes. And I pitched for a few years on softball, so I can send you a few pitches. I'm back here geeking out with Laura.
Laura Stengro.
Yes. Because I was like, who is this man? Why haven't I heard of him and seen you speak? Because you're hitting all the gems of the research that Jackie and I have been trying to present. As far as leadership and your analysis of the film Hidden Figures, where you saw how it was the supervisors who took initiative to investigate the changes and then bring it back to their team. That was wonderful. Initiative is cultural. Like there's certain background issues, cultural issues that look at different ways that people take initiative in certain situations. How do you and your leadership team deal with that and make sure that people have the necessary support to grow that difficult skill, especially depending on their cultural and situational backgrounds?
Good question, Janine.
Yeah. May have played softball, but it must have been fast pitch. It wasn't slow pitch. No, it's an excellent question. I may not hit the mark exactly, and I'd say that a lot of that is a work in progress. When I came to DigiKey, when I took this role, there were so many things being done right. Part of my task was not screwing it up. But two areas that I wanted to make a difference. One is this mindset of continuous improvement, because success, you can be very innovative and entrepreneurial early in your career as a company, but as you start to achieve some success, you start to get conservative. You start to want to go into the prevent defense. Anybody that follows football knows where that generally leads to. You lose your lead and things get precarious at the end. So how do you maintain that? The second was we were very good at training people. We will train folks how to answer a phone within 3 rings, how to answer a question, how to pick apart, how to package it, et cetera. We didn't excel at L&D, learning development, how to grow leaders. We're guilty of that. Let's take the strongest picker with the highest pick rate, let's make them the pick supervisor. Same thing with IT. Let's take the best programmer, we'll make them the head of that group. So that's still part of an evolution. We took 2 of our leaders, Shane, who's naturally in education, and Linda, she's with her 35 years, and they went off and got some external helping, and we've done it 2 ways. We've tried to raise the tide of the baseline across the company, taking things like Covey principles, et cetera. And then we created our own program, our own ALP, an accelerated leadership program where we pick classes of 20 at a time. And to date, we've gone through, I believe, 4 of them. It's an 18 months intensive to get folks functionally across the organization. And we'd go through a number of different topics. We'd put them on projects. And the number one benefit was they got to know each other. And so as we started having challenges in the organization, they naturally reached out to some of their cohort partners that were developed. So far from a finished product, but those are the things that and we never deviated. We've had the crazy times of COVID, and then the last couple of years, not so exciting on bottom lines of companies, but some of those things you have to stay the course.
And, kudos to DigiKey and to you, Dave, because you're doing it. And, that's the key, is just putting these types of programs, doing these things, making the changes, and just continuing with it. But this conversation went so fast, stay right here. I'm not going to kick you off the stage. But I just wanted to flip through real quick, see some of your team. Yay. All this smiling faces here at DigiKey. This one I love. Dave. And I wanted to show a quick video real quick. Oh, and there's your wife, right?
Absolutely.
Yes. And let me just click here to something. Was this quote, I put this in here, Dave, was this from you? It was in our notes. I don't know. I threw that in there because I was like, was that a Dave Doherty, or would that just get stuck in there?
Way too smart for me.
But it was a good quote, though. So you mentioned coach, and so this, I think of you when I think of this. So I'm going to play this.
mediocre people don't like high achievers. And high achievers don't like mediocre people. Just like our spring practice right now. You know what my goal of spring practice is? Get the right guys on the bus, get them in the right seats, and get the wrong guys off the bus. So one of these days, you're going to be working in an organization, and somebody's going to try to do that to you. So which one of those people do you want to be? Do you want to be somebody that's trying to get off the bus because you're satisfied with mediocre performance? Because you can never have any team chemistry in your organization if everybody's not committed to the same standard and the same things.
Wow, very well.
And you, Dave, are one of those on the bus with us, and I wanted to take a moment to say to you that we wanted to honor you today with a Spirit of Excellence Award that we're going to, is our first year doing this, and with all the history, the consistency of years over time of you having that spirit of excellence, we just wanted to honor you with this award from We United. So thank you for the leader that you are, Dave.
Thank you. Thank you. It means a lot. It means a lot. Thank you.
Final thoughts?
Yeah, final thoughts is I should be reciprocating, because as I started this conversation, we need you. This isn't about trying, for me, leveling the playing field. It's about getting you in the positions you need to be in our industry. It's not just at DigiKey. You are our future, so make it happen and make sure you clear those obstacles along the way. Every speaker that Jackie brings to the forefront here or that you listen to otherwise is teaching you how to do that. So take notes, and I wish you tremendous success.
All right. Thank you, Dave. So awesome.
really?
Thank you. It was so good.
Thank you.
All right. All righty. Here we go. So next.